Hello and welcome to this creative session. My name is Benjamin Viney and I'm a product expert here at Serif. And in today's creative session, we're going to be looking at how to create and lay out an illustrated book. Now, when I say book, I specifically mean novel. And with Halloween being so close, I thought it'd be fun to do something a little bit spooky, maybe a little bit scary. So what better book to choose to illustrate and lay out than Bram Stoker's 1897 classic, Dracula. This 125-year-old book, despite its age, still sends shivers down people's spines when they read it for the first time. And in fact, I only read it for the first time myself last year. And ever since I've read it, I've always wanted to create an illustrated version. So that's exactly what we're going to do. The session's going to be split into two parts. The first half is going to focus on the creation of this illustrated front cover. We're going to focus on how we've created some of the illustrations, some of the text and how it's been placed, as well as some of the design decisions we've made with laying out the front cover. The second part is going to focus on the internal pages of the document, and specifically we're going to focus around Chapter 1, laying out the initial text, setting text styles for chapter titles and chapter headings, as well as page numbers, running headers, and of course adding in a few illustrations as we're going along, as this is an illustrated book. Now, of course, we're going to be using the amazing Affinity Publisher application to create and lay out this book. But when I was first planning this session, I decided to set myself a little bit of a challenge. And the challenge was to see if I could create and illustrate all of the artwork that I needed for this book directly in Affinity Publisher. Now, the reason I've done this is because it's probably common knowledge. The publisher's great at managing and displaying text. It's really good for creating sort of beautiful and wonderful layouts. But I also wanted to show you that you can use Publisher in a way to create illustrations and graphics that are really going to help you with your artwork and your books, but directly from within Publisher. Now, of course, there's a little bit of a caveat here that we do have access to the personas within Publisher. And these, of course, give us access to the designer and photo toolsets as well. And we are going to use them a little bit, but we're going to try and focus mainly on Publisher's core toolset. So, without further ado, let's get started. And the first thing that we need to decide is what size of book we're going to produce. Now, this can be actually a little bit tricky to get your head around, because there's so many different book sizes out there. But luckily for us, Dracula being over 100 years old, there's lots of different examples out there already that we can take a look at for a bit of inspiration. So I have 3 examples here. And we've got 3 different sizes that all carry out slightly different jobs. And the first one we've got here is it's a Penguin Publishing Classic. It's a UK B size, and it's sort of your standard hardback that you maybe find in the UK. Now, this is a deluxe version. We've got a beautiful shiny cover and a very nice book. It's hardcover, but the great thing about a UK B is it fits really nicely in your hand. It's really portable, it's really durable, and it's great for just taking anywhere to pick up a book and start reading. Alternatively, we've got some US sizes here as well. So this is an octave. So it is an American book. It's been printed over in New York. And as such, it is a little bit floppy, though despite being the sort of size that you might expect a UK hardback to be. But it's a really nice size. It's lots of room for the text to be laid out nicely. We're not sort of squashing everything in. It makes it really easy to read and a really nice, enjoyable experience. It is obviously floppy, but it is a soft cover and a soft touch. And obviously we have the really nice, punchy Dracula fangs on the front as a design. The last size we've got as an example is the Quattaro, which I always want to call Quattro, but it's actually called Quattaro. And this is absolutely huge. It's just massive. And that is because this is an illustrated version, but it is also a study guide version. And again, a little bit strange that it's a flexible version. It's not a hardcover. That's kind of what I would have expected for something of this size. But again, we've got this sort of really nice sort of scroll artwork, which works really well. Again, a soft touch cover, which I'm quite enjoying. And something of this size means that you've got lots of space to write notes around the edges. You've got lots of space for your illustrations to really breathe and to look really good on the page. So the question we end up asking ourselves after all of this is, what do we want the book that we're producing to be and to do? So I think that if you're going to all the effort of creating really nice and beautiful illustrations, you're going to the effort to make it a bit special. You're pretty much making a deluxe version. And as a result, I think for me, A deluxe version probably needs to be a little bit bigger than maybe the UKB size, maybe even bigger than the Octave, but definitely not as big as the Quattaro. So we want something that's a bit in between these sizes. And I think for that, I'm going to choose something called a Royale. Now, there's two different types of Royales. There is an American Royale, which is called an Octave Royale, and a UK Royale, which is just called a Royale. They're a little bit bigger than the ones we've seen here today, a little bit bigger particularly than the Octave, but it's going to give us a lot of room to lay out the text really nicely, to add a few sort of illustrations actually within the text itself, as well as hopefully giving us enough room to let our illustrations breathe and come across really well. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and open up a new document. And we'll change the size to something custom, so we'll adjust the page width from 210mm to 156. We'll also adjust the height of the document to 234, which is the size of a UK Royale. Our DPI already being set to 300 gives us enough overhead if we have any raster content involved in this work, and as well we'll leave document units set to millimeters and the image placement policy set to preferred linked. We'll scroll along to the Pages tab, and we'll make sure that Facing Pages has been selected. As well, as we're going to design our front cover from within our document, we also want to change the start on from right to left. The number of pages in your document is completely optional, but I like to start with something like 12 to give us a bit of wiggle room and a few pages already created to help us out. Under the Colour tab, we'll double check to make sure that we have the CMYK format selected. And moving along to margins, we're going to go ahead and just reduce the outer margin down to 20 and the top margin also down to 20 as well. We'll keep the inner margin set to 25, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, but essentially this gives us a bit more room on the inner spine to actually lay out our text without running into any issues. Finally, we'll change our bleed settings. We want a bleed running around the edge of our document, and normally 3mm is fully acceptable, but for safety I quite like to run a 5mm bleed. So we'll change that to 5, and once I'm happy with my settings, I'll go ahead and I'll click Create. And there we go, our document's been created and we're ready to start designing. So I don't know about you, but sometimes when starting a new document and staring just at this blank page, you can find it a little bit daunting. And sometimes it's actually just a little bit hard to start designing, to start interrupting that really blank white space. There's a really easy way to get over this, or to try and break this down and make it easier, and that's simply to start breaking down the document. So I'm simply going to go ahead and grab my rectangle tool. We'll choose a generic colour, so actually a 20% black is actually quite nice. It's going to make us a grey. And we can just simply start click dragging out shapes onto our pages to establish sections. So this first page is obviously going to be our cover page. The inside page will be a splash page, so pages 3 and 4. And we can keep going with this, so we can grab instead our text frame tool and just drag out a text frame on this page. And this is going to be where our legal will go, so our copyright notice and the name of the book. So the page underneath will be used for our table of contents. And finally, on the right hand side, as is tradition, will be the start of our chapter 1. And there we go, just a really nice quick way to start breaking down the document. Now, there's an argument here that we could have gone straight in and started sectioning the book using our section manager. Now, there's nothing stopping you from doing this, but for me, I'm still sort of working out some of the pages in between my front cover and chapter 1, so it's something I'll probably do a little bit later on when that's a bit more established. We'll move back to the front cover. So before we start creating the illustration for this front cover, we'll need to adjust the size slightly. Because we're creating a hardcover book, we'll need to increase the size of the front cover by about 5mm on each side. We'll also need to add in the actual spine of the book. And this is calculated by the number of pages and the thickness of paper. So in this scenario, the illustrated book being a deluxe version and a hardcover, we're going to be printing on paper that's probably going to be about 120 GSM. And the book is going to be roughly 418 pages. Now it may increase to 431 by the time we're finished, but it's going to be roughly around that number. And this means the spine is going to be around 30mm for a hardback or 31mm for a dust jacket. So we'll go to our document setup. We'll make sure that we have selected spread selected rather than the whole document. We'll select pages 1 and 2, and we'll adjust the page dimensions. We want to increase the overall page height by about 10mm to give us that extra 5mm per side. So we'll change 234 to 244. We'll also need to change the dimension of the width, accounting for both the 5mm increase and the cover increase. So it will be 30mm divided by 2 plus 5mm, which equates to an extra 20mm. So we'll change 156 to 176mm. Once I'm happy with this, I'll click OK. And we can see it's now increased the size of our page. So we'll just increase our square to fill the entirety of the screen, as well as our surrounding bleed. Now, we need to go ahead and draw out our spine. And we know that our spine mathematically needs to be 30mm, but I think I want a little bit of an overlap onto the actual front cover of the back of the spine. So it's going to sort of overlap slightly around the corners as it bends, just giving us a bit more breathing room and a bit more wiggle room. So we want the spine width to be 35, and in fact, I've drawn it directly on 35, but in case yours wasn't, you can go to the transform panel, go to the width of the shape once it's selected, and change it to 35. We obviously need to set this as a different colour so we can see it. I think the type of colours that are going to be used are going to be reflected in the book itself. So in the example books, we had lots of blacks, lots of reds, sort of relating to obviously vampires and blood. So I think we'll choose a red for the spine to begin with. So we'll go for something like maybe 100 magenta, 100 yellow, and I think we'll darken this down ever so slightly. So maybe we'll go for a 40k as well. This sort of nice, sort of rich blood red. Actually, I quite like that colour. So what I might do is I might just quickly set that to the background as well. So we'll just sample the colour and apply it to the shape. And again, we'll do this to the splash page as well. Just select the page and use the colour wheel or the colour well to sample the document. Now the problem with this is we've lost our spine in this. So it's still there, but it's just hiding now because both are red. So I think to differentiate it a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and add a gradient fill to this spine. So we'll go to our fill on our context toolbar, and we'll make sure that we're under the gradient tab. And I think what we'll do to start with is we'll just go ahead and we'll select the same colour and just apply it. We'll then go into colour. And I think as well, we'll just then drop this down slightly, sort of a bit more of a dark maroon, maybe just a very, very dark red, trying to keep as much brown out of the colour as possible. Nice, so that's looking quite good. I think what we'll do though is we will change the orientation. So we'll grab the gradient tool and we'll just start to drag this down. In fact, we'll drag it up as well so the black goes from the bottom instead. Holding shift just to constrain it straight, just to create a bit of a gradient fade running down this spine. In fact, we'll push it down a little bit, push it up slightly. Great, so we've got a sort of gradient spine going on, which is correctly measured. I think as well, we're going to start adding a bit more to this background. So the spine is still being sort of lost inside this sort of rich red that we've placed on the background. So I think for that, we'll start by sort of sketching out maybe a bit of sky. So we'll just draw a new rectangle, and it's currently saved our last default. So it's currently displaying as this red gradient that we've got here. But instead, I want to change the colour, and I think I want to make it quite a midnight blue, I think that's where we're going. So we'll push the cyan up massively, we'll drop the Y slightly, and we'll put a little bit of Y back in there. And drop the K slightly. Just sort of this rich midnight blue. There we go. That's quite nice. And I think what we'll do is we'll actually use a transparency filter just to fade this midnight sky out. So just create sort of a nice sort of faded arc, quite subtle. Trying to make this gently fading in. Sort of this almost midnight sky mirage effect that we've got going on here. I think what we'll do then is we'll click, drag, duplicate. So I'll hold Command on Mac, with Control on Windows, just to copy that across. We'll flip that round as well, using the flip horizontally option. And then we'll drop this behind the spine. So great, we've started to build up some of the colours we're going to use in our book. We've got this really nice, sort of beautiful midnight blue, which is going to act as sort of our sky and as our offset colour. And then we've also got the really deep, rich red, which obviously relates very well to Dracula and to blood. So we need to start thinking about what we want to do in terms of how we're going to sort of style and theme the illustration for the front cover. And I think for me, as you probably saw in some of the opening scenes, the style I've gone for, the style that I'm going to go for, is going to be this almost sort of paper cut-esque style. And I quite like the fact that sort of surrounding this as an idea, the paper itself can be seen as quite fragile, quite brittle, really easy to break. When you start adding things to it, like illustrations or words, it can become really powerful, really solid, and really imposing. I also quite like the fact that the sort of paper cut style also reminds me really heavily of like stained glass windows. And with the book being over 125 years old and about selling a medieval castle that has, I assume in my head, stained glass windows, it kind of fits quite nicely into the sort of historical aspect of the cover or the illustration that I think we should create. Now, as well, I think it's really important that with all of the illustrations in this book, the book that we're creating, that we actually go back to the original Dracula story as well. And in chapter 1, John Harker is literally traversing his way across the Carpathian Mountains on his way to Bukovina and Dracula's castle. And quite a lot of chapter 1 is about him sort of struggling through and riding these rickety horse-drawn carriages over these mountain ranges, trying to get to Dracula's castle. On top of that as well, you get into sort of chapter 2 and other places within the book as well, and it describes how Dracula's castle sits upon this huge ravine, this rocky outcrop that just drops away for miles. And there's like tiny sort of snaking rivers, and it's just this incredibly sort of beautifully spooky, rocky terrain. And I think for me, that really struck home, and that I really wanted to put in the sort of elements of the rocks of the mountains, and alongside a few other bits like that. I think as well, there's also points where Harker describes sort of traversing along this road and things looming out and just sort of coming out of the gloom towards him. And I think for me, that's where the castle comes in. I think the castle sort of looming out of the gloom, suddenly just appearing above him in this sort of torn down, ruined glory, in a sort of a magical and mystical way almost as well, that maybe defies a bit of science and logic, is quite a powerful image. So I think that's what we're going to base the front cover artwork off. So with that in mind, we should probably get on and manufacture or create some sort of mountainous or rocky terrain to set the scene within our illustration. And because I don't want to make this video any longer than it needs to be, I think what we'll do is we'll actually cheat a bit, and we're going to place some of the illustrated mountains that I've already done just to save a bit of time. So we're going to go to File, and we're going to select Place. We'll then locate the file we want to place and choose Open. We can then stretch out this design, get it just to fit into this front page. We'll just push it over slightly. We'll just drop this behind the red spine. So I've just used the shortcut there, Command and square bracket. You could, of course, actually grab the layer on the Layers panel and dropped it below that spine. And these have just been created really simply. We've used the pen tool just to sketch out a sort of nice mountainous range, and then we've gone back in and we've just highlighted sort of rocky outcrop shapes. So we've been a bit free and a bit random here, just creating these nice sort of highlighted areas just to add a bit of sort of legitimacy to the mountains. But then again, I think when I did this, again, making that nice paper cut style, I think it was a bit too bold and a bit too punchy. So what I did is I copied the background, changed the color to white, and then I changed the opacity down to create this sort of light fade over this left-hand side, just to sort of dull down the difference between the two colors a bit. Now, we don't need to do that so much with the foreground, because the foreground's going to take actually a bit of focus. So we've got this really nice sort of beautiful rocky red precipice. And again, this is me thinking about how John Harker's probably traversing around these mountains, and there's going to be opportunities where you're just going to look over off the edge and there's just going to be all this amazing, beautiful scenery. And for this, I think what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of sort of like texture or a little bit of grass. And there's nothing stopping me going in and again, using the pen tool and just creating a few sort of like grass-like shapes and just adding them in to this rock foundation, this rock formation. But instead, I think what we'll do in the effort of trying to save time is we'll actually jump over to the photo persona, and we're going to use a raster brush to try and add just that same sort of element into this rocky outcrop. So the brushes we're going to use are part of the Frankentoon Concept Master brush, and you could alternatively make yourself a brush that does a similar thing, or again, like I've said, use the pen tool to do this as a vector. I think I quite like some of the random effects you get with this sort of pixel-based brush effect, but just as a heads up, obviously, these brushes weren't free. They're not default within the software. So we'll just go to our layers quickly, and we'll go ahead and create a new pixel layer. Make sure that the pixel layer is above our mountains, but below our spine. And then we'll just go through to the brushes, and we'll select some of the brushes we want. I quite like this sort of FT nature. It's got a bit of variation to it. And we'll start off by selecting the sort of same red color that we've got on this mountainous area. And I think what we'll do is we'll then just ever so slightly, we'll just lighten it very subtly using our sliders. Just when we add this in, it's sort of a nice subtle effect. And I kind of want to make clumps sort of randomly around sort of areas that you may expect it to have. I don't want to be too thick in any one place. We will just reduce the size down to maybe about 65. We can add a little bit more in texture. And again, we're just trying to apply the sort of grass effect. We don't want to overdo this. Just a nice little sort of like contrast. It's sometimes nice to flick up off and sort of over this precipice, so it just sort of adds a bit of texture. And I think as well, we'll swap brushes. There's this really nice sort of like, it's almost like speckled wheat or things like that, which we've got here. So we could go a little bit lighter again. We might make a bit more of a bigger jump on this one maybe, and just add some like long bladed wheat here, which is quite nice. Again, just very subtly adding a little bit of texture to this area. And again, trying to keep that clump going. Do you know what I mean? Trying to keep the grass almost like growing in tufts. Just really subtly and speckly adding texture to this sort of foreground. Now, for those of you who know the story, Dracula makes land in the UK at a place called Whitby. And when Bram Stoker was actually writing the book, he decided to go visit Whitby to get some inspiration. He went and saw the ruined monastery, the ruined abbey that's there. He went to see some of the town and just sort of understand some of the historical things that had gone on. And whilst there, he discovered record of a wrecked ship. And the wrecked ship was called Dimitri. And it had wrecked against the rocks and the waves just outside the port, and it had been stranded there for hours and eventually met its untimely end. And it's rumoured on there that amongst the things that were travelling across the land with, that there were 2 swords that travelled across on the Dimitri, and when wrecked, were lost. And as Bram Stoker obviously used this as quite a lot of influence, even in the way that he's writing the book, so apparently the fact that there were diary entries on the Dimitri, and that's why John Harker writes in diary entry form, that's where it all started. I also like to think that these swords may have gone missing, and they may have gone missing because Dracula snuck away with them. So I think what we'll do is going to add these on into the left-hand side as well. So we'll jump across back into the publisher persona. And again, we're just going to place these swords, to save time, into the bottom left-hand corner. Now these swords, again, have just been made using shapes. And they're just quite basic shapes. But again, they've got little details that link to Dracula. So we have very, very small bat on the top left. This actually is obviously a massive cross section. Again, just trying to link a little bit into the book's history. Now we want to make sure that we put these swords behind the pixel layers that we've just created. So they're sort of going to blend against the grass rather than fight it. In fact, we'll just position them right about here. Just adding small little details. All we've done here is we've blocked these out using the normal sort of shape tools, a little bit of converting shapes to curves and using the node tool, just really basic solid shapes. Again, going along with that really paper cut style effect. So I think what we'll do is we'll duplicate the layers that we've created now, and we're going to add this so it also matches on our back cover. And to do this, we're simply going to select the layers we've created, and then we're going to click drag duplicate by holding Command on Mac, but you could hold Control on Windows instead, and just drag and duplicate these files onto the left-hand side. We'll also then use the flip function on our toolbar and just position it roughly into place. So with our back cover now in place and it's starting to look quite like a nice sort of symmetrical design, we need to sort of be very careful that we don't add too much more to the back cover. We want to leave space for our blurb and our title and some of the back information that you'll normally find on the back of a book. But that doesn't mean we can't keep adding things to the front cover. So next we're going to add in Dracula's castle. Now again, to save time, we're going to go ahead and place it from a document that I've already created. And we're just going to simply drag this out an appropriate size, and we'll just spend a little second fitting this in place, as this is sort of the main feature of the front cover. We want to make sure it's sitting nicely in, and this path is sitting nicely on the mountainside. We've got a really nice effect currently starting to work here. We've got this midnight blue sky that we put in really early on. They're starting to fade nicely into this red, and this red is sort of illuminating the sort of castle quite nicely. Now, one of the things I love most about the Affinity apps is the fact that you can keep vector artwork incredibly crisp and zoom into ridiculous detail for quite a long time. Now, it's not infinite zoom, but I have asked our tech specialists, and what they've told me is that you can quite comfortably go to 1,000,000% zoom and everything will still be really nice and crisp. And what that means is you can zoom in and create designs that are incredibly complex. So, for instance, we have lots of these sort of really nice, beautiful, ornate windows on this castle that I've created directly in Publisher. And what we've done here actually on lots of these is we've created the initial artwork just using Publisher. And then we've gone ahead and used the shape builder to cut out sort of more intricate shapes in the designer persona. And we've done that on some of the more ornate windows. We've also got sort of much more simpler windows around some things like this, where we're actually just built purely just on shapes and purely just using gradients. But what I love about all of this is that you can zoom in, you keep things really crisp, and obviously you can just design things that are incredibly detailed, and you can still keep everything really, really sharp. Now, we've got a bit of space up here on the top right, and I don't think that's quite right. So I think what we probably need to do is we need to add in a few of these windows. But instead of just copying them across, I think I'm going to draw some new ones just to show you how I've built them. So we're going to start, as you might expect, with a rectangle. And we're just going to draw out a nice, thin rectangle shape. Now, just to see this a little bit better, I'm actually just going to fill the shape. So we've got a green on the outline there. And we're just going to fill that with a nice green, just so we can see it a little bit easier. Now I'm going to go to our Move tool, and with our shape selected, I'm going to choose to convert this to curves. And this has now become curves. What we're going to do is we're going to put a node directly in the middle of our square. And we're going to drag this up, holding Shift, just to keep it nice and constrained. There we go. So we've got a nice triangle top. And what we're now going to do is, instead of creating a node, we're going to click along the line, and we're going to click and hold and just billow this shape out a little bit to create a bit of a nice arch. Now again, we don't want to do this too aggressively, but we just want it to be nice and smooth. We'll match on the other side as well, just creating nice window shape. I want to get them as similar as possible on both sides. Nice. So we've got this sort of now pointed rectangular shape, and this is going to form the basis of our design. So what we'll do now is we'll just use our Move tool, and again, I'm just going to click Drag Duplicate, again holding Command on Mac, Control on Windows, to duplicate this out a few times. Now this central one, we're going to want to have as our fade. So we've got all this really beautiful sort of like red to pink to yellow fade. We obviously want to replicate that into these windows. So we're going to go to the Fill option on our context toolbar with our curve selected. And then we're just going to start by sampling some of the colors. So we'll start by sampling this really dark pink. We'll just apply it to this node. We're going to start a new node as well in the middle. So we're going to double click along this line. And again, just recenter it. And then grab this more vivid magenta. And again, apply it using the color well. Lastly, we're going to select the last node in the gradient sequence. And this time, actually, I'm going to go for a lighter selection on that node. I'm just going to use the color picker. Let's go for a lighter yellow and just assign it there. So there we go. We can see we've got the gradient starting to take shape. But again, the gradient's going the wrong way. So we'll grab the gradient tool and we'll just start to stretch that gradient down, creating this really nice sort of subtle fade. Now I'm going to stretch it out as well because I want this sort of to look like the sky is reflecting down through this window. The other three shapes that we copied earlier, we're going to actually set to outlines only. And we're just going to adjust the stroke. We'll set the mitre to around 3, so we've got a sort of sharp corner on each of them. And then we'll adjust the stroke individually. We'll increase the stroke to maybe 0.25, just a little bit thicker. We'll change the colour to something a little bit darker. So we'll just darken that up, add a bit more midnight to it. For this stroke, we'll reduce the stroke down to maybe 0.1, so nice and skinny. In fact, we're just going to keep that green on the inside, but we are just going to change the stroke's position, and we're going to change it to the inner. So just to clarify what we've done, we've changed it from central to inner. So it's just going to push that stroke inside and act as a bit of a frame going around the corner. And then lastly, I think what we'll do with this one is we'll change the colour to sort of a mid-tone. So we're going to darken it slightly, but not as much as the others. We're going to reduce the stroke to, again, maybe 0.1, sorry. And again, I'm just going to slip this into place, and we want this one to be in between. We'll just make a really nice sort of like repeating pattern almost, forming the frame of the window. Once we're happy, we'll just overlay it over the original window. So next we need to create the window base. So it's almost a bit like a sconce. It's almost hanging off a tower almost. And for this, we obviously need to make this sort of round shape. You can go very complicated for something like this, but I think we'll just start with this general green one we have here. So to begin, we're going to go and find our triangle tool. And we're going to simply draw out a triangle. We'll try and match it to the width, the maximum width we have here. In fact, we'll just extend that slightly. And then we'll simply just spin that round. We're going to fill that with one of the green colours that we already have. So we'll grab we'll keep the central green actually, and just fill that shape there. And then just slide this up slightly. Well, again, we'll choose to convert this to curves. And what we want to do is individual points of nodes running down this spire, this spike, this triangle. And with that in place, we can now just start to bend and curve the spaces in between the nodes. And this is going to get us to create a sort of almost chandelier-like effect. Next, we're simply going to select the rounded rectangle tool. Go in and just try and connect these sections up. So again, let's select something a little bit darker. So we'll go for this green here, and then we're going to knock out the outline as well. And in fact, that might be a little bit too dark. We'll go for something maybe a little bit more green. There we go, a little bit more subtle. And again, we're just going to click, drag, duplicate that down. You could, of course, draw a new one instead and just push them into position. Finally, we're going to add a central one for like our actual almost window sill. And with this, we're going to drop a smaller, thinner rectangle underneath just to add a bit of colour difference. And we're going to add this, it's quite a bright colour. And again, all we've done is we've simply just added a section of shapes together to build up a greater design. We'll compress that down ever so slightly. And that should be our finished window. So, with that in mind, we'll group everything together. So we'll select everything on the Layers panel, and we'll choose Group. And we'll resize this slightly to be more in line with the size of windows that we have here. And I think we'll now click, drag, duplicate out a couple of times to make a few different sections. I think we'll position these somewhere over here. And in fact, we could also just duplicate these around, increase them slightly, and have them almost stepped, increasing sort of along this arch here, this sort of downward slope that we have here. I think I am going to stagger them slightly, so they are going to be moving down in sort of a general like gradient. I'll skinny you up slightly. There we go. So one of the things I wanted to include in this illustration was to do with the way that John Harker first meets Dracula. When he first meets him, he's just been through the journey from hell. Literally, he's on the back of a horse-drawn carriage which has been thundering along these roads, but he's been surrounded by these wolves and this strange blue fire driven by Renfield, who's this very gaunt and very strong and giant man who's driving this cart towards them in the bitter cold after days of travelling. And it's all going on, and time itself is starting to sort of blur and blend, and he feels like he's going in circles over this, again, mountainous terrain. And he gets to this courtyard, and Renfield helps him down, and all of a sudden the doors open. And from the doors emits this like warmth and light just spilling out into the courtyard. And it's this really interestingly counter feeling. It's this beautiful warm light. He's just come from all this ordeal, and from within the light comes Dracula. And at this point, you don't know he's a vampire, you don't know he's evil, he's just a man who lives in a very strange castle. But it was such a beautiful image in my head, and so vivid in my head, I thought it was really interesting and really important to include it in the front cover illustration. So that's what we're going to do next. So we're going to just zoom in, obviously, to the door frame, and again, we're going to grab our trusty pen tool. Now, in this case, we're going to simply use our Smart Node option, and what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to create a nice little curve around the door frame, and initially, I want to just select the area around the door frame. Now, next, we're going to want the light to spill probably pretty far. So we're going to go for quite a straight line. We'll snap back to the Smart Node. I want to create sort of like a nice individual curve. We'll go back to the Sharp Node. And then I think, very particularly, we're just going to follow the shape of the door to begin with. We've got this sort of almost bow shape here, which is quite nice. And I think that's going to act quite well just as the light spills out into the courtyard. We're going to fill the curve with a yellow, and I think I'm going to keep this pretty standard, really quite nice, bright, light yellow. And I think what we'll also do is we'll go ahead again and add a transparency to the shape. Now, I want the light obviously to come from the door, so we're going to go actually pull from left to right. We're just going to pull out in this way. Again, this is quite a nice sort of fade. It's potentially way too strong though in this center. So I think what we'll do is we're going to actually use some of the layer blend modes. We're going to go to our layers panel. I'm going to scroll down to soft light. And you can see already it's made a massive effect in just dropping the harshness of that yellow. I think as well we'll drop this down to 75%. I think what we'll do now is we'll just start to layer this effect up. So again, we'll grab the pen tool, we'll press escape, and we'll start to just replicate this effect again. Using the pen tool, just to create that sort of light shape. And I think we'll be careful about some of the nodes. So I think actually we'll make this bottom one a bit sharp because I want it to really cut through, almost be a little bit like a god ray. And again, we're just going to set that shape and color to 71 yellow. We'll layer that up again and do soft light and drop the opacity down to 75. I think we'll do that again one more time. So again, we're going to press escape so we're not drawing on the initial one. And again, use a few smart nodes coming round. A sharp node to end. Let's just put this back. So again, we'll choose 71. We'll put this to soft light. Drop this to 75. It's something we forgot on the last one actually, is the transparency. So we'll just apply the transparency to both. So we'll stretch this out and apply the transparency as well to this one. Again, might need to push this a little bit further. It's just creating this really nice sort of subtle light effect of this light spilling out of this doorway, opening up into the night. And in fact, we could refine this a little bit more. So I think if we use the node tool, maybe pull this round slightly, just have this literally disappearing into the night a bit. and just expanding that round. I think as well, maybe we'll do one actually just illuminating the ground. So maybe we'll use sharp nodes for this, and we'll just spill this way. We'll change to a smart node, just spilling. I think we'll spill across, I think. So sort of spilling out of the doorway and falling away this way a bit. We'll set it to 71 again. Oh, 71, sorry. Set it to 71 again. Again, we'll do another soft light. And we'll take that to 75. In fact, we might take that a little bit further. Maybe we'll take that down to about 50. And again, our trusty transparency. Just building up layers. Just really subtly making that nice sort of effect. Fantastic. Well, the castle and everything's really starting to come together, really starting to bring it alive. But I think what we are missing from this is probably the moon. Now, the moon is quite a sort of prominent feature within the story itself. Maybe more towards the point when they're trying to track down Dracula actually in Whitby. But I think what we'll do is we'll start with a solid circle. So I think this is going to be quite a big element to this front cover. It's going to be quite a prominent feature. What I want to make sure is that actually it follows as much as possible the curve of the castle. We might shrink that slightly. And of course, we're going to send this backwards to behind the castle. So there we go. We can follow the curve really nicely. We're after this sort of wonderfully, sort of very vivid, crisp outline that we're getting from this sort of nice silhouette. And I think this is the yellow we used on the door, but I think we might need to go a little bit more subtle. So what I might try is actually a 31Y. That's a bit better. That's a bit creamier, a bit more stark, and I quite like that. I think what we're going to do then is we're going to actually layer up a few different circles on top with a few different transparencies, almost a bit like a manual gradient. So I think what we'll do is we'll copy and paste the circle 3 times. So we can see on our layers panel now, we've now got 3 ellipses. And the middle ellipse, we're going to go for, let's go for something really subtle. I'm going to put a tiny bit of blue in it, not a lot, a tiny bit of blue. We'll put a lot of magenta in. So we'll go for 2, 86, 75, and then 0. And then for the top one, I'm going to go for something very close to the original red. So we'll go 0, 100, 100, and maybe 2. So it's a bit more reflective than the original red that we've got. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to layer these up using transparencies. So again, we're just going to go from the bottom right and start to merge that transparency a little bit further along. Just trying to create really nice, quite subtle sort of yellow glowing moon. I've now started to tie in the red glow you've got down here on the right. You've got this amazing stark contrast against this sort of shadowy effect. Last but not least, I feel like we have to add in some bats. So there's actually very little reference to bats in the Dracula original book. I think Mina says once when Dracula's obviously trying to get to her that he turns into a bat and sits upon her window. So it's very few sort of references, and it's something that's definitely gained sort of fame and infamy as Dracula's become more popular. More people have done obviously different adaptations. But I do think it's a really nice thing to put in. It's quite a nice little feature, and we'll probably use this as a bit of a motif later on. So to do this, we're going to simply start by placing a bat-like shape. So this is one that we've grabbed. And again, we're going to use our trusty pen tool just to recreate this shape. Now, I can actually see this is a little bit lopsided, so we'll maybe do something about straightening that up. But we'll use this as a bit of a basic shape. So once again, we'll come to our pen tool. And this time, starting with straight nodes, I think, we'll just start tracing around this shape. Now we've got a bit more of a curve going on here, so I'm going to switch to smart nodes and just curve around here. Make sure the rubber band mode is also turned on, which is really useful. And then just to start following this curve round. Then again, just on the tips, we'll switch to sharp nodes. And again, creating sort of a nice singular arc. In fact, we might make this a little bit stronger. And I think as well, we may just extend down past here. We'll switch to a sharp node at the end and connect this shape up. Oh, I think we'll turn that to 100% K for a bit of a black. In fact, I'll go for a little richer because we're on screen maybe. Great, so we've got our first bat sort of shape. I think actually as well, we'll hide the original shape that we were drawing round, and we'll use this as a bit of a template. So we'll straighten up ever so slightly this line, so it's actually sort of nice and straight. And again, we'll simply drag, click, duplicate by holding Command. You could hold Control on Windows, it's Command on Mac. We'll just flip this round to form the other half of the bat. That's quite a nice little motif. I think as well, I quite liked on the template that we were looking at, the fact that there were sort of two different colours to make up the bat. It gives it a little bit more of a dimension, makes it a little bit easier to see as well. So I think what we'll do is we'll push the other side to grey. There we go, nice. We'll just make sure that these two sides do meet very well. We'll just stretch this one out a little bit. I'll stretch this one out a little bit and make sure they meet down the middle. We'll then group those two together. And I think what we want to do now is we want to position these as they're sort of fluttering in a sort of very cloud-like way out of the tower. So I think we're just going to literally click, drag, duplicate, slowly increasing in size and sort of variation. I think you could have fun with this. Again, I'll do some really, really small ones. I don't know if the original ones need to be a little bit more solid colour, a bit more outline. Let's go. Yeah, just spot these through. And a sort of bit of a random assortment. Slowly and slowly getting bigger. When I'm doing this, I want to make sure that I am constraining to sort of proportion. So don't need to hold shift to this. If I hold shift while moving them rather than transforming them, it'll give me a little option to keep them aligned straight. Again, just holding Command on Mac to duplicate these out. B Control on Windows to do the same thing. And finally, I think we're going to go for a really big one. Sort of half across this side here. I think we'll skew this one slightly because as a result, just change some of the angles here. Great. Again, we could spend a bit more time getting that absolutely perfect. But I think that's starting to look really, really good. Fantastic. So we've got our cover illustration in place. Next, we need to look at adding in some text. So we'll start by adding in the title. And there's an argument here that the title should be either placed at the top or the bottom of the cover page. And I think most people who have designed sort of magazines or publications would probably default to putting the title at the top. It's sort of an old technique that allowed your viewer to read the title of the magazine first and hopefully have a bit of brand recognition and be interested enough to pick up the book. So there are a few reasons why we probably won't put the title at the top though in this example. One of those reasons is that the top of this illustration is very, very busy. We've got lots of towers and turrets alongside with these bats that are sort of taking over the top half of this illustration. And I think we need to be very careful as well with the moon, in fact, because if we make the title text white, which we probably will, with this very light area here, the text could start to sort of blend in rather than stand out. On top of that, I think actually as well, we need to let the illustration stand on its own 2 feet. Hopefully the illustration itself is interesting enough to bring readers in and to bring viewers over to look at the design. With this in mind, we're going to try and place the title at the bottom of the page. So to start with, I'm going to select the text frame tool. I'll then simply draw out a text frame. And of course, we'll add in our title, which is Dracula. I'll turn the text to pure white, so it stands out from the background. We'll increase the font size to something like 50 points to give us an indication of what the title size might be. We'll also duplicate the text frame because we're going to add in something called a tagline. Now, you wouldn't always include a tagline on a novel. In fact, it's something of a rarity. And I want the tagline to work quite closely and well with the actual title itself. So we'll go with a tagline based on the novel written by Bram Stoker. Next, I think we need to take a look at the fonts we're using. At the moment, we're using very generic fonts. I believe this is Arial. And in fact, we probably need something a little bit different and a little bit special for the title. So I think what we'll do is we'll try out a few different fonts to see how they look and see how they feel. We could try something maybe a bit more handwritten. So we could try something like Le Petit Robe, which is a really nice scroll font. It's pretty, but it's very hard to read. So instead, let's try something maybe a bit more Gothic. Maybe we'll go for an Apple Gothic font. We could go for something like this, which is a really nice sort of serif font, but it's a bit boring. Very readable though. We could go for something a bit more old school, like Old Alfie. And we've got this nice scroll work. It looks like it actually fits in quite well with the sort of time that Dracula was released. It probably relates quite well to some of the books we saw earlier. But it's not the easiest font in the world to read. And I want the cover to be really easy to read and really sort of jump out at you. So maybe we'll go for something in between. How about Brilliant? Brilliant's sort of that wonderful combination of nice Gothic text that's got a little bit of scroll work going on, but is also really, really clear and easy to read. And because it's an all caps font, I actually think in this case it makes it quite nice and easy to read. Now that's not always the case when you go for all caps, but I quite like it in this scenario. I think we'll increase the font size slightly. In fact, we'll just use the handle this time to drag it to an appropriate size. And then we'll just nestle this in line with the center. Next, we'll make a bit of a change to the tagline font. I think I'm also going to turn this to all caps by going to our typography settings and selecting all caps. We'll reduce the font size down. Maybe we'll go for something like 10. And that's actually looking pretty good. We move this into position. We can base this directly under the D in line with the D's baseline. And we'll reduce the kerning to -40 and just reduce the size slightly until it fits underneath the Dracula title. You can now position these slightly down. And I want to position these about in the centre of the book, in the centre of the lower third. Now, originally, when books were produced early on, the spine used to have the author's name and the book title written across it horizontally. And as mass production became a thing and people started trying to cut down the amount of pages that went into a book to make it cheaper to produce, obviously the spines got thinner and thinner and thinner. And as a result, most of the time nowadays, actually, you'll see both the name and the book title written down the spine. Now, this changes depending where you are on the world. And again, there's not really a hard and fast rule. It just seems to be that there's a done thing depending where you are. So if you're in the UK or the US, normally the name runs down the spine. If, however, you're in Europe, the name will run up the spine. Now, again, this does differ, so it is something that I very much advise you to check for wherever you are in the world. What is the done thing? I'm hoping that if you do get this printed, your publisher will be able to help you out with the process. But because we're based in the UK here, we are going to focus on putting our name down the spine. So, as we already have our Dracula text from our title, I'm just going to click drag duplicate to bring our title across. Now, as mentioned originally, the title used to go horizontally across the spine. And this spine is actually thick enough to be able to do just that. So maybe what we'll do is we'll try this in a few different locations. I think first we'll go ahead and we'll add in our author's name. We know our author is Bram Stoker. And I think we'll try something generic for the moment. So we'll go for something like Times New Roman, and we'll make it bold. That's quite neat, and I don't dislike it, but we might need to make some changes later on. I'm going to borrow this back again by click, drag, duplicate, center him up, reduce his size by scaling around the center. We'll turn him to all white, and he'll act as a bit of a motif at the top of our spine. Now, as I said, the sort of done thing with authors' names particularly is to run them down the centre of the spine. So I think we'll try that slightly because as well it's more recognised as the done thing, and we'll just increase this until it sits in the middle of our spine. So we'll try something like 30 to begin with. Maybe we'll increase this to 40. And one of the tips I have here is that the small triangle at the start of the text frame will always run down the centre of the first line of text. So we'll just align that to the centre of the book. And that does look quite smart. I think what we'll do is we'll take the bold off, which is slightly better, and maybe we'll increase the size again to around 50. Nice, I think that's looking quite good. Because this is sort of a deluxe version, I'm actually going to add a few more things onto the spine that you maybe wouldn't see normally. We're going to add a publishing mark. Now, I've clearly paid homage here to Bram Stoker. He's the man who wrote the book, and he's done a very good job of it. But I also wanted to put my mark on it a little bit as well. So I've got a little publishing mark that I've just literally very quickly mocked up. And we're going to simply place this in to our document. Something I've started doing to place on books that I've started to illustrate or I've had an involvement with. I think underneath that as well, as this is effectively a special edition, I think we're going to say that. I think we'll add limited edition text as well at the bottom. I think we'll drop this down slightly, as well as the original date that this was released, which was 1987. I think we'll drop this down slightly. And there we go, starting to really nicely take shape. Finally, I'll look to add in the blurb and the back cover text. So again, we'll borrow the title text. We'll click, drag, duplicate, and then reduce down the size slightly. I want to make sure that the top of this L intersects with the bottom of Dracula. Not far off, need to come down just a few pixels. Great. Next, we'll lift the date and we'll place this in the center aligned against Dracula. We'll do a small line running through its center, which will also make white. We'll set the thickness to 1. And we'll just straddle this either side. Next, we'll add in our text frame. And inside, we'll insert our blurb. Fantastic. We'll set the text again to times. We'll set it to center. I think we'll resize this to about 8. We'll make sure that these are aligned using our alignment tools. And I think we'll expand the spacing slightly. Finally, we're going to add a limited edition number to the bottom left. With the book being a small and limited print run, I think it's nice to sometimes place this at the bottom. Finally, we'll continue the motif and we'll grab the bat, click, drag, duplicate him, and just place him above. Now, there is an argument here that if you were doing a limited print run, and if you were numerically numbering those prints, that maybe you wouldn't apply that information here as you export your front cover. It may be done actually as it's printed on the line by a printing press by a different machine. Fantastic. So that's our cover in place. We've got our text, we've got our illustration, and it's looking quite good. For the next section of the video, we're going to focus on our internal pages. And specifically, we're going to focus on placing chapter 1. So to start with, we're going to use some master pages. And the master pages are there to help us repeat repeatable information. So we're going to use our master pages to set up our running headers, as well as our page numbers. So we'll navigate to our master page. And we'll also turn on our margins so we can better align things as we're going along. Now you may notice that the gap between our inner margin and the center spine is slightly bigger than that of the outside. Now this is for a couple of reasons, but the main reason is that when your pages are bound together, the book won't lie completely flat. And this often gives the appearance of text being uncentered. If we place the text too close to the center line, the text may disappear into the gap and may make things very difficult to read. So generally, you have a bigger gap from the center of the spine and your inner margin. It also means that when we're aligning the pages of the book, we're aligning to the center of the margin, not to the center of the page. So to begin, I'm going to go ahead and select my text frame tool. I'll then draw out my first text frame. And in this frame, we're going to insert a running header. So I'm going to right click, insert field, and choose running headers. We'll select the text frame, and we'll make sure that the text is 100% K black. We'll reduce the text size as well, down to 12 points, and we'll also make sure that our text is all caps. I'll then duplicate the text frame, and I'll replace the field with a page number field. We'll reduce the page number size to around 10. As this is an illustrated book, I think we'll do a small design either side of our page number just to offset it slightly. As you'll see later on, some of the internal illustrations are reminiscent of card designs. As such, I'm going to do a diamond-esque pattern reminiscent of some of those cards. So I'll start by drawing out a black square, and I'll just remove the outline. I'll tip this onto its side, and then again I'll click, drag, duplicate to duplicate the square. I think then I'll convert this to curves, grab our node tool, and extend this right-hand side. I'll then slowly curve in the right-hand side to give it more of a tail shape. I'll then center this alongside my text, leaving enough space for when the page numbers go to double and triple digits. I'll duplicate this, use the flip function and place it also on the other side, equal distance from my text. I think I'll turn the two longer tails to a slight grey. Now, I played around with a lot of ideas for these page number illustrations. Part of me originally thought about doing the swords again. I also thought about doing the bat, but I didn't want to overuse any particular motif. So I've gone for this simple pattern for the time being, but of course you could choose to do your own. With our page numbers and our running headers in place, I'm going to select the entire page, click Drag Duplicate, and realign it to the right-hand page as well. So something to bear in mind is that Master A by default is applied to all of our pages. So this means that we should actually go through and strip out that master to any page that is before the start of chapter 1. So we'll select our pages in the Pages panel, right-click and choose Clear Master. We'll then navigate to page 9 and 10, focusing mainly on page 10, as this is where we want our chapter 1 to be placed. We'll delete the little reminder we left ourselves earlier, and start by drawing out a new text frame. I'm going to go to just below halfway down the page and draw out a normal text frame. I'm then going to right-click and choose Insert Filler Text. I'll select all of the text, and we'll reduce the point size to about 9, and actually we'll set the text font to Times New Roman. I'll then draw a new text frame above, and in this frame we're going to centre a line, and we'll start by typing the word Chapter 1. I'll then decide to increase this to around 12 points. We'll turn it to bold, make sure it's centre aligned, and under our typography settings we're going to set it to all caps. We'll now go up to our context toolbar, and we're going to save this chapter 1 style as our chapter number text style. So I'll call this 01 chapter number. And because we preset our font, it will already have all of our options saved. So we can just go ahead and click OK. The next bit of text that we want in the same frame is going to be the chapter name. So the chapter name for chapter 1 is Jonathan Harker's Journal. We'll make a few changes to the text. So we'll remove the bold, but increase the size to 14 points. And what we want to do is want to go ahead and also save this as a new text style. We'll call this text style 02 chapter name. We'll change our alignment settings to center, and we'll make sure that capitals are selected. We've now added both the chapter number and the chapter name as text styles. And this means we can do something a little bit clever. We can use the system for next style. So if I go back into chapter number text style and go back to style settings, I can then choose the next style to be chapter name. And this means that if I was to delete our chapter name text, I could simply press enter and type out the chapter name, and it would automatically navigate to the next style. This is a really nice and sort of quick and easy way to use text styles to sort of improve our workflow and speed things up in the long run. Before we move on any further, we're going to assign the running headers that we made on our master page to the new text styles that we've created. So we'll navigate back to Master A, select our running header, right-click and choose Edit Field. We'll then assign the style from heading 1 to chapter name and choose Close. We'll repeat the process, Edit Field, change heading 1 to chapter name and choose Close. Now, when we consult our page, we can see that the running header is displaying the chapter name at the top of each page. Whilst we're editing our master page, I think as well I'm going to strip it out of page 9. So I think what we'll do is we'll select the master page, choose right-click and choose Edit Detached. And this will only edit the master page that's been applied to this page, not the original master. So we'll select the items we want to delete, so the running header and the page number on the left-hand side. And once we're done, we'll press finish. There's an argument here that you could just strip the master page from page 9, which is perfectly viable. This is just the method I've gone for at the moment. I think as well, we may just drop the running header ever so slightly from its position, nudging it down slightly. Fantastic. Next, I think we're going to go ahead and actually insert our text. Now to do this, we're actually going to use the process called autoflowing. But before that, we need to prepare some text frames. So I'm going to use the plus icon that we have on our first frame. I'm going to select it. I'm going to go to the top of our margin and draw out a new text frame. I'll then repeat the process, linking the next frame that we draw out to the next page. So next, I'm going to select all of the filler text, and I'm going to choose to place a docx Word document on our first page. So I'm going to use the shortcut for place, which is Command-Shift-M. I'm going to locate the text, I'm going to find chapter 1, and I'm going to choose Open. Fantastic. So currently, it's positioned that text into those frames. I'm going to select all of the text once again and just remove the all caps. We'll also go ahead and make sure that everything is Times New Roman and that everything is 9 point. We'll also remove the bold. Whilst we have everything selected actually as well, we'll go to our character. We are just going to increase the spacing slightly. We'll momentarily delete the chapter 1 and chapter title, just to keep things nice and tidy. Finally, as you've probably already noticed, chapter 1 won't fit into just 3 text frames. And this is where the autoflow principle comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to autoflow the rest of the text which is currently overflowing or currently overset. In fact, you can see some of it here. So what we'll do is we'll position our cursor into the frame. We'll go over to the red triangle, and whilst holding Shift, we're going to single click. And what this will do is this will autoflow all of the remaining text that is inside those frames, and it will create new pages and new frames, no more text for it to create and fill. Finally, we're going to place the illustration that's going to go on the top of the chapter head. And I think I've had quite a lot of fun with these. I went for a sort of card themed that I think I mentioned earlier when we were doing the page numbers. And the idea behind this is that we were going to do a sort of character card for each character as they're introduced for each chapter. And on that card would be things that had happened to that character during their time within that chapter. Obviously, the first card had to be Jonathan Harker, as that's who we're first introduced to and whose diary we're reading. So let's find this illustration out and just click drag to insert it in place. So we have the paprika, which he has in several meals in his journey on his way to the castle. We also have the diary that he's writing in, and we also have the blue flames that he sees flickering out of his carriage window as Renfield drives him towards Dracula's castle. I'm not super happy about the image I've got for Jonathan Harker. I struggled a bit actually, because part of the way he speaks is a little bit old-fashioned and therefore actually makes him feel a little bit older than he actually is. But I think this is not too bad of a representation. He's meant to be a young, charismatic, hardworking, qualified solicitor from Exeter, which we also have on down here. And again, so all of the imagery has been created in Affinity Publisher. We used the photo persona to create these icons here. We did find the original image of Jonathan Harker. That's a stock image we've used alongside with the back of the card, but everything else has been created again in Affinity Publisher. Finally, I thought it wouldn't be a first chapter illustration without adding a little bit of blood. So we've got a bit of an image here that we're going to also place, and it's a bit of a blood splatter. We're just going to section this out over the bottom of the image. And we don't want this to be too invasive, but we do want it to pack a bit of a punch. So we'll go back to our layers panel, We'll we'll make sure we have selected the image layer. And we're going to go for a linear burn, I think. And what this is going to do, it's going to take out the sort of white background, and it's just going to splatter nicely over the card. Now, we don't want this to be too much to be actually like gratuitous, but I quite like the fact that it gives this sort of mottled effect over the text here. Now, the problem we've got, though, is that currently this is sort of invading the actual sort of chapter 1, chapter name text, and this isn't something we want to happen. So we need to make a little bit of a mask, and I think I'm going to do this probably a little bit subtly. So I think the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to the photo persona, and again, we're going to use something like the erase tool. I'm going to get for a really soft masking brush, I think. I'm just going to create a bit of a mask using this brush, sort of erasing this image out. Again, we just want to sort of subtly erase it out. Now, again, there's nothing stopping you here actually just using a proper mask, as in using the pen tool to create one. I'm just sort of making use of some of the options I've got here as I have access to the personas. Hopefully that's slightly less dramatic and slightly less violent. So hopefully that's slightly less dramatic and less violent. And there we go. We have our chapter 1 embedded into our document. We've got our illustrations as well in place, as well as our running headers running and our automatic page numbers functioning as well. I think the last thing that I'd quite like to do is that there's an awful lot of letters in Dracula. So not only this being a diary, John Harker also writes to Mina, Dracula writes to John. There's letters going back and forth on a lot of occasions. So I think that's something I'd quite like to illustrate in this version. So what we're going to do is we have this letter here from Dracula to Jonathan, and we're just going to sort of strip this down and illustrate it slightly. So I'm going to reduce the text frame so it only shows the text in question. And I think we'll start by drawing out again just a square. Now, this square we want to make a sort of papery effect. So we're just going to slowly crank this up, offering just sort of a bit of a very light paper-esque kind of colour. That's not too bad. I think that's okay. And I think actually we'll make this a little bit of a gradient. We'll make this a little bit more realistic. And we'll potentially just section this down slightly. I think I want to move away from grey. So I think I want to go actually more to the brown or yellow side of this sort of creamy texture. Nice. So I think as well, we'll go ahead and we'll use the stock panel and we'll search for a paper texture. We'll drag this texture in and over. And again, this is a bit big, so we need to resize this down, obviously. What we can do is we can clip this inside the paper rectangle, and then we can change this blend mode as well until we find something that's going to work nicely. Maybe we'll go for a linear burn, but we'll reduce its effect down somewhat. So I think as well, we probably want to make this a little bit of a peculiar size and shape. So we'll copy the text and we'll actually cut that out of place. And for the moment as well, we'll just reduce the size of that original text frame. And we'll grab a new text frame and insert the text in its place. So we'll just tidy this up a little bit as we're going along. And because this is going to be an individual letter, we're going to remove the punctuation. I think as well, we'll keep developing the letter slightly. So we're going to convert the outline to curves. And I think we're going to add some general chips and rips into the page. Now, I know this was probably written on quite nice paper. And actually, I'm sure Dracula himself wouldn't have written to a new friend on paper that was either marred or tired, but I think it's probably been through several messengers' hands and may have got a little bit damaged on the way. And in fact, I think we can probably create a bit of a sort of corner flicked effect around this section, so it can look like it's almost been curled a bit at the bottom. In fact, we don't want that curl to be too extravagant. We just want it to be sort of a bit subtle. But we will just keep making a few changes. Again, just putting a few little rips and little marks into the page. I think this is going to really help in terms of like making this sort of come a bit more alive and just being a bit more realistic maybe. There we go. That's starting to come together. I think we'll grab the pen tool as well very quickly, press escape, and just go ahead and very quickly section this corner off. Well, again, go for that same sort of color we had earlier. And again, we'll apply the paper texture to it. Again, absolutely ginormous, so we'll just reduce this down. We'll clip that to our shape. And I quite like the fact actually that's darker, because that's sort of the effect that we wanted to have. So I think that may be what we do. Or do we drop this behind? I think that's the effect we'll go for. We'll maybe just curl these edges slightly, just to add a bit of interest. We'll go ahead as well and add a small outer shadow effect. So we'll just add some generic shadowing. We'll just increase that slightly, increase the offset slightly, and just drop the intensity, just to give it a little bit more realism. Finally, we'll go into the text and start making a few changes. We, of course, need to go in and change the font. So there's lots of different fonts, again, that we could try for this. My favourite sort of scroll is Le Petit Robe, but it is very hard to read, so maybe it's going to be a little bit difficult. Will it just increase the size to maybe about 20? Yes, this is going to be very hard to read in this state. But maybe we'll keep it as an introduction and as a sign-off from Dracula. We will pretend Renfield has written this, and actually it's just Dracula signing it off. So if instead we went for something like Schnell, it's not bad. It's quite elegant. It's a bit maybe fancy, maybe a bit sort of rigid. So what instead if we went for Buttershire? Now this could work. We definitely need to go back in and we need to increase the spacing most certainly somewhat. And I think that's actually, though, that's quite nice. I think as well, we'll just go ahead and increase Dracula's actual signature. And maybe we will try my friend as Le Petit Robe. Yes, I quite like that. We've got a bit of a top and tail going on. Lastly, we'll squidge this in ever so slightly. And there we go. We have an illustrated letter to John Harker. Now we could continue to play around with this. I think we could make the gap bigger from our top as well as our bottom and just get that a bit more center aligned. But I think you get the general idea. Lastly, actually looking at this as well and the general text, we are just going to center justify all of this. So we're going to actually select everything and make sure that everything is completely justified across. Again, being very careful to keep that letter where it is. I think eventually we'd probably group this together and maybe anchor it to the start of this text here. Amazing. So I think that's everything in place. Fantastic. Well, it looks like we're almost there. We've got our front cover in place, as well as our illustration and our text. Chapter 1 has been inserted, and we've got our page numbers, and we've got our running headers as well as the chapter illustrations. So it's all starting to shape up and looking quite good. And this has been a really fun project, one that I've very much enjoyed. I've really enjoyed getting to grips with it. And I have to say thank you, obviously, to Bram Stoker for writing such an amazing book and basically inspiring the entire genre of horror classics. So we do very much appreciate that. I guess there's only one more thing to do, really, and that would be to get this ready for exporting and printing. So what we'd probably look at doing is obviously going to File and choosing to export this as a PDF format. Now, there's several PDF formats you could use, but the ones I think I would recommend would be PDF Press Ready and PDF X4. Exporting as PDF press ready will make sure that you export your document as a CMYK file. That is, unless you change the preset. PDF X4, on the other hand, was sort of designed to be a press-ready print format. Now, the final thing that I really should say about this is that you do obviously need to be a bit careful with some of your colours in some of these illustrations, and obviously the colours of your text. Specifically, if you've used any Pantones, or specifically about your blacks. So it's a known fact that obviously when exporting for print, you need to set your blacks to 100% K, so they print really nicely and they don't feel like this sort of muddy brown grey. Now, we've obviously made sure that our text is set to 100% K, so that's going to be a massive weight off our shoulders, but we would also probably need to go through and check our illustrations to make sure they are also 100% black. If you're ever confused with any of the print stuff, my sort of recommendation is probably to go for PDF X4 and make sure everything is set to CMYK. But I'd also make sure that you go ahead and you talk to your printer, you talk to your publisher, and find out exactly what it is they want from you. We can then press export, find a place to save it, and choose save. Amazing. Well, once exported, there's really only one thing left to do, and that's to send your document to the printers for printing. Now, as you can imagine, that's exactly what we did. We sent our document over to the printers and got it printed up. Finished off a few of the other chapters as well, and the table of contents and such, just to round it all out. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I've really enjoyed producing the content and creating the session. It's been an awful lot of fun. I mean, the pumpkins are probably evidence of this enough already. But I hope I've also had a bit of a chance to maybe change your perception of how you view Publisher. It's a great tool. It's one I really love, and it's fantastic at creating layouts and text management, but it's also so much more than that. It can be all about creating sort of beautiful illustrations directly within Publisher, just to really support your graphics or your layout that you're currently working on. Last thing to say is there is a download link in the description below, which allows you to download lots of the project files associated to this video. So feel free to download that and have a crack at this yourself. For the moment, though, the only other thing to say is that I've been Benjamin Viney. Thank you so much for joining us for this video. I wish you an absolutely fantastic week and a brilliant Halloween. Thank you for watching.